It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in a quiet little neighborhood. The sun was shining bright, making everything look happy and warm. Birds were chirping in the trees, tweeting little songs like they didn't have a care in the world. Kids were running around, playing tag and laughing loud enough to fill the air with noise. It was one of those perfect days where you just want to sit outside and enjoy life. And me? I was just trying to park my car in my own front yard. Easy, right? No big deal. I mean, it's my yard, my house, my rules. What could go wrong? Well, let me tell you, it didn't stay easy for long. Not when you've got a neighbor like Karen Miller living next door. Oh, Karen, she wasn't just any neighbor. She was like the queen of the whole street, or at least she thought she was. She was the boss of something called the HOA. That's a group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like telling people what color their house can be or where they can put their trash cans. Sounds boring, huh? But not to Karen. To her, the HOA was everything. She carried the rulebook around like it was some kind of magic wand or maybe a big, scary weapon. She'd wave it at people, point to the pages, and tell them what they were doing wrong. Rule number 12 says no loud music, she'd yell. Or, rule number 47 says your grass can't be too tall. Everyone on the street knew who she was. And guess what? Nobody liked her. Not one bit. See, I was new here. I'd just moved into my little house a week ago. It was a fresh start for me. A new place to call home. The house wasn't fancy, just a small place with a white fence and a little patch of grass out front. I liked it, though. It felt like mine. I had a beat-up old pickup truck, too. It wasn't shiny or new. The paint was chipped, and it made funny noises sometimes, but it got me where I needed to go. That Saturday, I pulled up to my house after a quick trip to the store. I had some groceries in the back: milk, bread, a bag of chips. Nothing exciting. I didn't feel like parking on the street because, well, my yard was right there. It's my grass, my space. So I rolled my truck up onto the lawn, turned off the engine, and hopped out. Simple. Done. Or so I thought. That's when Karen showed up. Oh boy, did she show up fast. I'd barely stepped out of my truck when I heard her door slam. You know that loud bang a door makes when someone's mad? That's what it sounded like. I looked over, and there she was, marching out of her house like she was on a mission. Her house was right next to mine, big, perfect, with flowers all lined up in neat rows. She always kept it looking like something out of a magazine. But her face? That wasn't pretty right now. She looked mad. Really mad. Her eyes were squinted, and her mouth was all tight, like she'd just bitten into a sour lemon. In her hand, she was holding her phone, gripping it so hard I thought it might break. She stormed across her yard, over the little line where her grass met mine, and stopped right in front of me. She didn't say hi. She didn't smile. She just pointed at my truck and yelled, "You can't park there." Her voice was loud, louder than the kids playing down the street. It made me jump a little, I won't lie. I looked at her, then at my truck, then back at her. Huh? I said, scratching my head. I wasn't trying to be rude or anything. I just didn't get it. It's my yard. My truck. What's the problem? But Karen didn't care about that. She kept pointing, her finger shaking like she was so mad she couldn't keep it still. That's against the rules, she shouted. You can't park a car on the grass. It looks terrible. You're ruining the neighborhood. Ruining the neighborhood? I looked around. The sun was still shining. The birds were still singing. The kids were still laughing. Everything seemed fine to me. But not to Karen. To her, my truck sitting on my own grass was like the end of the world. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want a fight. I'd only been here a week, and I wasn't looking for trouble. So I shrugged my shoulders and said, "It's my yard." That's all I said. Just 3 little words. I thought maybe she'd see my point and leave me alone. Boy, was I wrong. Those 3 words were like throwing a match into a pile of dry leaves. Her face turned red, bright red, like a tomato. Her eyes got wide, and her mouth opened like she was going to scream again. I swear, I thought I saw steam coming out of her ears, like in those cartoons where someone gets super mad. She took a big breath, and I braced myself, because I knew whatever came next wasn't going to be nice. "You think you can just move in here and do whatever you want?" she yelled. "This is my neighborhood. I've been here for years. I make the rules around here, and you're going to follow them." She waved her phone at me like it was proof she was in charge. "I'm calling the police," she said. "They'll come and make you move that ugly truck. You'll see." I blinked at her. The police? For parking in my own yard? That sounded crazy to me. But Karen didn't think it was crazy. She was already tapping at her phone, her fingers moving fast. She was serious. She was really going to call 911 over this. Now, here's where things get interesting. See, Karen thought she had all the power. She thought she could scare me, boss me around, and make me do what she wanted. She thought I was just some new guy who didn't know the rules. But there was something she didn't know. Something big. Something I knew that she didn't. And it was about to flip everything upside down: her world, her rules, all of it. What do you think it was? Can you guess? Don't go anywhere, because this story is just getting started, and it's going to get good. Let's rewind a little bit so I can tell you more about that day. Like I said, it was a sunny Saturday. The kind of day where you open your windows and let the breeze come in. I'd been out running errands, nothing fancy, just picking up some stuff I needed for the house. I'd only been living there a week, so I was still getting settled. The moving boxes were still piled up in my living room, half unpacked. I had a chair, a table, and a bed, but that was about it. The yard wasn't much to look at either, just a square of grass with a few weeds popping up here and there. I didn't care, though. It was mine, and I was happy to have it. My truck was old, like I told you. It was blue once, but now the paint was peeling off in big flakes. The front bumper was a little bent from a fender bender a couple years back. It rattled when I drove it, and sometimes it took 2 tries to start. But it was mine, and I liked it. That day, I'd driven to the store to grab some food. Milk, bread, a bag of chip stuff to get me through the weekend. When I got home, I didn't feel like parking on the street. It's narrow out there, and cars zip by pretty fast sometimes. Plus, my yard was right in front of the house. It made sense to me just pull up, park, and carry my bags inside. Easy peasy. I didn't think twice about it. I turned the wheel, rolled the truck onto the grass, and shut it off. The tires sank into the soft dirt a little, but it wasn't a big deal. I grabbed my keys, hopped out, and that's when Karen came storming over. Let me tell you a little more about Karen, because she's a big part of the story. She wasn't tall or short, just average, I guess. She had short hair that was always perfect, like she spent an hour fixing it every morning. She wore bright clothes, pink shirts, yellow pants, stuff that made her stand out. And she always had that phone in her hand. Always. I'd seen her a couple times since I moved in, walking around the neighborhood like she owned it. She'd stop and talk to people, but it wasn't friendly talking. It was more like bossing. "Your mailbox is crooked," she'd say to one guy. "Your dog barks too much," she'd tell someone else. People would nod and smile, but you could tell they didn't like it. They just didn't want to argue with her. Karen was loud, and she was pushy, and she didn't back down. Ever. That's why I wasn't surprised when she came after me that day. I'd heard about her from the guy who sold me the house. "Watch out for Karen," he'd said with a laugh. "She's the HOA lady. Loves her rules." I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured I'd keep to myself, and she'd leave me alone. But parking my truck on my grass, that was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Karen couldn't let it go. She saw it, and she flipped out. She didn't even give me a chance to explain. She just marched over, yelling and pointing, like I'd done something awful. When she said, "You can't park there," I didn't know what to say at first. I mean, it's my yard. I bought the house. The grass came with it. Why couldn't I park there? But Karen didn't see it that way. To her, it was a crime. A big, terrible crime. "It's ugly," she kept saying. "It makes the whole street look bad." I looked at my truck. Okay, it wasn't pretty. The chipped paint, the bent bumper, it wasn't winning any beauty contests. But it was just a truck. It wasn't hurting anybody. The neighborhood still looked fine to me. The sun was still out, the kids were still playing. Nothing was falling apart. But Karen acted like my truck was the worst thing she'd ever seen. I tried to stay cool. I didn't want to yell back. I'd only been here a week, and I didn't need enemies. So I just shrugged and said, "It's my yard." I thought that would end it. Like, hey, it's my place, I can do what I want, right? But nope. That made it worse. Way worse. Karen's face went from mad to super mad. Her cheeks got all red, and her eyes got big and wild. She looked like she was about to explode. "Your yard," she said, like it was the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. "This isn't just about your yard. This is about the neighborhood. My neighborhood. I've lived here for 10 years, and I'm not going to let some new kid ruin it." New kid? I'm not a kid. I'm a grown-up with a job and a house. But to Karen, I was just some troublemaker who didn't belong. She kept going, waving her phone around. "I'm calling the police," she said again. "They'll come and tow that junk away. You'll see." She started dialing, her fingers hitting the buttons hard. I could hear the little beeps as she typed 9-1-1. I just stood there, leaning against my truck, watching her. Part of me wanted to laugh. The police? Really? Over a truck on some grass? It sounded nuts. But Karen wasn't joking. She was dead serious. "Now, let's pause for a second. I've got a question for you. Have you ever had a neighbor like Karen? Someone who gets mad over little things and tries to boss you around? Think about it. Maybe it's someone who yells about your trash cans or your loud music. Maybe they're just nosy and annoying." Karen was all of that and more. She thought she was the queen, and I was just some peasant who needed to bow down. But here's the thing: she didn't know everything. She didn't know who I really was. She didn't know what I knew. And that secret? It was a big one. A huge one. It was going to change everything, and Karen had no idea it was coming. Picture this, me, standing there by my truck, the sun beating down on my head. My groceries were still in the back, probably getting warm. Karen was in front of me, yelling into her phone. "Yes, hello, police," she said, her voice all sharp and bossy. "I need you to come right now. There's a guy breaking the rules. He parked his truck on his lawn." She made it sound like I'd robbed a bank or something. I could hear the person on the other end talking, but I couldn't make out the words. Karen didn't like what they said, though. "No, this is serious," she snapped. "You need to send someone now." While she was busy yelling, I looked around. The street was still quiet, except for her. The kids had stopped playing for a minute to watch, their eyes big and curious. A couple of neighbors peeked out their windows, probably wondering what all the noise was about. I didn't blame them. Karen was putting on a show. She kept pacing back and forth, her shoes stomping on the grass. She didn't even care that she was on my lawn now. She was too mad to notice. And me? I just waited. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Because something was about to happen. Something Karen didn't see coming. Something that was going to make her wish she'd never picked up that phone. What do you think it was? Can you guess? I'll give you a tiny hint: it had to do with me, and it had to do with why I was really here. But I'm not telling you yet. You've got to keep reading, because this story is about to get wild. Let's talk about that truck for a minute. Like I said, it wasn't much to look at. I'd had it for years. It was old when I got it, and it was even older now. The seats were worn out, and the radio only worked half the time. But it ran, and that's what mattered. I didn't care if it was ugly. It got me to work, to the store, wherever I needed to go. And that day, it got me home. I didn't think parking it on my grass would be a big deal. I mean, it's grass. It's dirt. It's not like I was blocking the road or anything. But to Karen, it was like I dumped a pile of garbage in the middle of her perfect little world. She kept going on about the rules. "The HOA says no parking on lawns," she shouted. "It's in the book. I wrote it myself." She was so proud of that rule book. She held it up sometimes when she walked around, showing it off like it was a trophy. I hadn't seen it yet, but I'd heard about it. The guy who sold me the house told me all about Karen's rules. She's got a rule for everything, he'd said. Don't cross her, or she'll make your life miserable. I'd laughed then. I didn't think I'd have to deal with her so soon. But here we were, 1 week in, and she was already after me. When I said it's my yard, I wasn't trying to start a fight. I was just stating a fact. It's my house, my land, my grass. I didn't think it was anybody else's business where I parked. But Karen didn't agree. To her, everything was her business. She'd been here 10 years, like she said. 10 years of bossing people around, making them follow her rules. She thought she owned the place, not just her house, but the whole street. And me? I was the new guy who dared to break one of her precious rules. That's why she got so mad. That's why she called the cops. But here's the fun part, Karen didn't know what was really going on. She thought she had me figured out. She thought I was just some guy with a junky truck who didn't care about her rules. She thought she could yell at me, call the police, and win. She thought she was in control. But she wasn't. Not even close. There was something big she didn't know, something about me, something about why I was here. And it was going to turn her whole day upside down. Maybe her whole life. Want to know what it was? Keep going, because we're not there yet, but we're getting close. Let's set the scene a little more. It was a warm day, like I said. The sun was high in the sky, making everything bright. My house sat at the end of the street, a little white place with a red door. Karen's house was next to it, bigger and fancier. She had a porch with a swing, and her grass was cut so perfect it looked fake. My yard? Not so perfect. It had patches where the grass was thin, and a couple weeds sticking up. I hadn't had time to mow it yet. I'd only been here a week. But Karen didn't care about that. She saw my truck on that messy grass, and it was like I'd insulted her personally. She kept yelling into her phone, telling the police all about my crime. He's breaking the rules, she said over and over. You need to come arrest him. Arrest me? For parking? I almost laughed out loud, but I held it in. I didn't want to make her madder. She was already pacing like a wild animal, her voice getting louder and louder. The kids down the street were watching now, sitting on their bikes, staring at us. A lady across the street opened her door and peeked out, then ducked back inside. Everyone could hear Karen. She was making sure of that. I leaned against my truck, crossing my arms. My groceries were still in the back, and I was starting to worry about the milk. It was hot out here, and I didn't want it to go bad. But I couldn't go inside yet. Karen was blocking my path, standing right between me and my front door. She didn't even notice. She was too busy shouting. Yes, it's an emergency, she told the person on the phone. This is serious. He's ruining everything. I shook my head. Ruining everything? It was just a truck. Just some grass. But to Karen, it was war. And that's when I knew something big was coming. Not because of what she was saying, but because of what I knew. See, I wasn't just some random guy who moved in. I had a secret. A big, juicy secret that Karen didn't suspect. She thought she was the one in charge, calling the cops, making a scene. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know what was about to happen. And when it did, oh, it was going to be good. Really good. Can you guess what it was? Think hard. I'll tell you soon, but not yet. We've got more to cover first. Let's talk about that moment again. Me, standing there, the sun hot on my shoulders. Karen, yelling and waving her phone. My truck, parked on the grass, looking old and tired. The neighborhood around us, quiet except for her. It was a funny scene, if you think about it. I mean, who calls the police over something like this? Most people would just knock on the door and say, "Hey, can you move your truck?" Not Karen. She went straight to DEFCON 1, like it was a national emergency. That's how she was, I guess. Everything was a big deal to her. Everything had to be perfect, and if it wasn't, she'd make sure you knew it. I watched her pace back and forth, her voice echoing down the street. Yes, I'm Karen Miller, she said into the phone. I'm the HOA president. This is my neighborhood, and this guy is breaking the rules. She said my neighborhood like she'd built it herself. Like every house, every tree, every blade of grass belonged to her. I wondered what the person on the phone was thinking. Were they annoyed? Were they laughing? I bet they got calls like this all the time. Crazy lady yelling about a truck, they'd say at the police station. Same old, same old. But this wasn't just any call. This was different. Because of me. Because of what I knew. Karen thought she was winning. She thought the cops would show up, take one look at my truck, and haul me away. She thought she'd get her way, like she always did. But she was wrong. So wrong. There was something waiting for her, something she didn't expect. And it was going to hit her like a ton of bricks. What was it? Oh, you're going to love this. Stick with me, because we're building up to it. Let's stretch this out a little more. That day, the air smelled like summer. You know that smell: grass, flowers, maybe a hint of barbecue from someone's backyard. It was nice. Peaceful. At least, it was until Karen started shouting. I stood there, feeling the heat from the sun, listening to her go on and on. My truck was behind me, the engine ticking as it cooled down. The groceries were still in the back, and I could see the bag of chips through the window. I was hungry, too. I'd been planning to go inside, make a sandwich, and relax. But now I was stuck out here, dealing with this. Karen didn't care about my plans, though. She didn't care about anything except her rules. You're new here, she said, pointing at me again. You don't know how things work. I've been here forever. I keep this place nice. She kept saying that I keep this place nice. Like she was the only one who mattered. Like nobody else did anything. I wondered what the other neighbors thought. Did they like her keeping things nice? Or were they just tired of her? I'd only been here a week, but I was already leaning toward tired. When I said it's my yard, she acted like I'd slapped her. Your yard, she repeated, her voice all high and squeaky. This isn't about your yard. This is about standards. Rules. Order. She said order like it was the most important word in the world. To her, my truck was chaos. It was a monster ruining her perfect little kingdom. She couldn't stand it. That's why she called the cops. That's why she was standing there, yelling at me, waiting for them to come save the day. But here's the thing: something was already in motion. Something Karen didn't see. Something I knew about, and she didn't. It was big. It was exciting. And it was going to change everything. What do you think it was? Any guesses? I'll give you one more little hint: it had to do with the cops, and it had to do with Karen. But I'm not spilling the beans yet. We've got more to go, and I promise it's worth it. Let's keep this rolling. The sun was still up, the birds were still chirping, and Karen was still yelling. My truck sat there, quiet now, just a big blue lump on the grass. I could feel the heat coming off it, warming my back as I leaned against it. Karen was in front of me, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, it's an old truck, she told the police. It's ugly. It's ruining the neighborhood. She kept saying that word, ruining. Like my truck was some kind of evil force. I almost wanted to pat it and say, don't listen to her, buddy. You're fine. I looked at her, trying to figure her out. Why was she like this? Why did she care so much? It was just a truck. Just a yard. But to Karen, it was everything. She'd built her whole life around these rules, this power. Being the HOA queen was who she was. And me parking on my grass. That was like saying her rules didn't matter. That's why she was so mad. That's why she wouldn't let it go. And me? I just stood there, waiting. I didn't argue. I didn't yell back. I didn't need to. Because I knew something she didn't. Something big was coming, and it was going to turn this whole thing upside down. Karen thought she was in charge, but she wasn't. Not anymore. What was it? Oh, it's so good. You're going to love it. Keep going with me, we're almost there. Karen wasn't just loud, she was fast. Really fast. I mean, I hadn't even had time to grab my keys from my pocket and take 2 steps toward my front door before she was already on her phone. Her fingers were moving like lightning, tap tap tap, and then she held it up to her ear. She didn't waste a single second. "Yes, hello, officer," she screeched, her voice so high and sharp it could have cracked a window. "There's an illegal vehicle ruining our neighborhood. You need to come right now." That's what she said, word for word, like she was reading from a script she'd practiced 100 times. I was still standing there by my truck, one hand resting on the rusty door, the other in my pocket. My truck wasn't fancy, it was old, with chipped blue paint and a dent on the side from when I accidentally bumped a mailbox last year. But it worked fine, and I liked it. Illegal vehicle? I almost laughed out loud. I mean, come on. It's a truck, not a tank rolling down the street with cannons and big wheels. It wasn't even loud anymore. I turned it off, and it was just sitting there on my grass, quiet as can be. But to Karen, it was like I'd parked a spaceship or a giant monster machine right in front of her perfect house. She didn't stop with that one call, though. Oh no, Karen was just getting started. She started pacing back and forth on her lawn, her flip-flops smacking the ground with every step. Smack, smack, smack. It was like a drum beat to her yelling. She held the phone tight against her ear with one hand and waved the other hand around like she was trying to swat a fly. "He's breaking every HOA rule," she shouted into the phone, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This is a disgrace. A total disgrace." She kept saying that word disgrace like it was her favorite thing to say. Every time she said it, she'd throw a dirty look my way, her eyes squinting and her lips all tight like she'd just bitten into a sour lemon. I leaned against my truck, crossing my arms, and just watched her. I could hear the guy on the other end of the phone, some poor police operator trying to talk to her. His voice was all fuzzy through the speaker, but I could tell he was saying stuff like, "Ma'am, please calm down, and can you tell me more?" But Karen wasn't listening. Not even a little bit. She just kept talking over him, her voice getting louder and louder. "No, you don't understand," she yelled. "This truck is ruining everything. It's on the grass. The grass. That's against the rules, and I won't stand for it." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. I mean, really. She was acting like my truck was some huge crime, like I'd robbed a bank or set off fireworks in the middle of the night. It was just a truck. A little old pickup sitting on my own front yard. The grass wasn't even messed up, it was still green, still growing, still looking fine. But Karen didn't care about that. To her, it was like I dumped a pile of garbage right in front of her house and set it on fire. She was so mad, I thought her head might pop right off her shoulders. She kept pacing, back and forth, her flip-flops making that smack smack sound. Every few steps, she'd stop, point at my truck, and then start yelling again. "Look at it," she said to the phone. "Just look at it. It's ugly. It's old. It doesn't belong here." I looked at my truck too. Sure, it wasn't shiny or new like some fancy car, but it was mine, and I didn't think it was that bad. Karen acted like it was the worst thing she'd ever seen, though. She turned to me for a second, her eyes all narrow and mean, and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself." Then she spun back around and kept talking to the operator. "He doesn't even care. He's just standing there like it's no big deal." I shrugged again. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Cry? Run away? It wasn't a big deal to me. It was my yard, my truck, my house. I didn't see the problem. But Karen? She saw me as some kind of troublemaker, some punk kid who didn't belong in her perfect little neighborhood. She didn't know me at all, I'd only been here a week. But in her mind, I was already the bad guy. She thought she was the big boss of the block, the queen of everything, and I was just some nobody who dared to break her precious rules. She kept going on and on to the operator. "I've lived here for 15 years, she said, like that made her extra important. 15 years, and I've never seen anything this bad. We have standards here. Rules. And this boy, he's ruining it all. Boy. I'm not a kid. I'm old enough to drive, old enough to own a house, old enough to know she was being ridiculous. But to Karen, I was just some dumb kid who didn't deserve to live next to her. She didn't even know my name, she just kept calling me him or that boy like I wasn't even a real person." I could hear the operator trying to talk again. "Ma'am," he said, his voice all calm and slow, "can you tell me exactly what's happening?" But Karen wasn't having it. "What's happening?" she shouted. "I just told you. There's a truck on the grass. It's illegal. It's against the HOA. You need to send someone right now." She was so loud, I bet the kids playing soccer down the street could hear her. Heck, I bet the birds in the trees could hear her. She was like a siren, blaring her anger for everyone to hear. I just stood there, leaning on my truck, watching her make a fool of herself. The sun was still shining, warm on my face, and a little breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. It was such a nice day, and here was Karen, turning it into a big drama over nothing. I thought about saying something like, "Hey, lady, chill out." But I didn't. Why bother? She was too busy yelling to listen to me anyway. Plus, I kind of wanted to see how far she'd take this. Would she really get the cops to come out here just for my truck? It seemed so silly, but with Karen, you never knew. She kept pacing, her flip-flops smacking away, and every few seconds she'd glare at me. Those looks. If eyes could shoot lasers, I'd have been a pile of ashes right there. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants," she told the operator. "Well, not in my neighborhood. We have rules for a reason." She waved that HOA rulebook in the air again, like it was proof she was right. I could see the cover from where I was standing. It was all white with big black letters that said Homeowners Association Guidelines. She held it up high, like a teacher showing off a book in class, and then she flipped it open, jabbing her finger at the pages. "It's right here," she said. "Page 12, Section 3. No vehicles on the grass. He's breaking the law." I rolled my eyes. The law? Really? I didn't think parking on my own yard was against any real law. Maybe it was in her little book, but that's not the same thing, right? I mean, cops don't care about stuff like that. They've got bigger problems, like catching bad guys or helping people. But Karen acted like this was the crime of the century. She was so sure of herself, so full of her own power, that she didn't even stop to think. She just kept yelling, pacing, pointing, and making a big scene. And me? I just stood there, cool as can be. I wasn't mad. I wasn't scared. I was kind of amused, actually. Karen thought she was winning, thought she was in charge, thought she was going to teach me a lesson. She didn't know I wasn't worried at all. Why? Because something was happening that she didn't see. Something big. Something that was going to change everything. See, while Karen was busy screaming into her phone, a police car was already rolling up the street. Quietly. Super quietly. No lights flashing, no sirens blaring, just a slow, sneaky creep down the road. It was one of those black and white cars you see in movies, with police written on the side in big letters. The tires barely made a sound as it moved closer, inch by inch, like a cat sneaking up on a mouse. I noticed it right away. I've got good eyes, and I'm always paying attention. The car was coming from the end of the street, where the big oak tree stands, and it was heading right toward us. But Karen? She didn't see it. Not even a little bit. She was too busy yelling, too busy pacing, too busy being the loudest person on the block. Her back was to the street half the time, and when she did turn around, she was too focused on her phone to look up. The police car kept coming, closer and closer, and I could see 2 officers inside. They looked serious, their faces all straight and calm, like they meant business. But Karen had no idea. She was clueless, lost in her own angry world. I didn't say a word. Not one peep. Why ruin the surprise, right? I just leaned against my truck, my arms still crossed, and watched. The car was getting closer now, maybe 10 houses away, then 9, then 8. It was slow, so slow you'd almost miss it if you weren't looking. But I was looking. I saw it all. And I knew something Karen didn't. That car wasn't here for my truck. Nope. It was here for something else. Something way bigger. Karen kept talking, her voice echoing down the street. "Hurry up," she told the operator. "This is an emergency. He's ruining everything." Emergency. I almost snorted. She was so dramatic, it was like watching a play. But I kept my mouth shut and my eyes on that police car. 7 houses away now, then 6, then 5. It was so close I could see the officers' hats through the windshield. They weren't smiling, but they weren't mad either, just focused, like they had a job to do. Karen still didn't notice. She was too caught up in her tantrum, too sure she was the queen of the neighborhood. She thought she was calling the shots, thought she was about to get me in big trouble. She saw me as some punk kid who didn't belong, someone she could boss around and scare off. But she had no idea what was coming. No clue at all. That police car was almost here now, 4 houses away, then 3, and I just stood there, waiting. The sun was still shining, the birds were still chirping, and Karen was still yelling. But everything was about to change. What was the police car doing here? Why wasn't I worried? Oh, that's the best part, you'll find out soon. But for now, picture this, Karen, all loud and angry, thinking she's in control. Me, calm and quiet, knowing something she doesn't. And that car, creeping closer every second, ready to turn this sunny day into something wild. Stick around, because this is where it gets really good. The cop car stopped right in front of my house. It didn't screech or make a big noise, it just rolled to a quiet stop, the tires crunching a little on the pavement. The black and white paint gleamed in the sunlight, and the word police on the side looked big and bold. 2 officers stepped out, one from each side, slamming their doors with a loud thunk-thunk. They were tall, dressed in dark blue uniforms with shiny badges pinned to their chests. Their hats sat low over their eyes, and their faces looked serious, like they weren't here to play games. Karen saw them, and oh boy, her eyes lit up like she'd just won the lottery. You know that look people get when they find $1 on the ground or get an extra scoop of ice cream for free. That was Karen right then. She clapped her hands together once, real quick, and shouted, "Finally!" Her voice was so loud it bounced off the houses around us. She waved her arms like she was trying to flag down a plane, her flip-flops smacking the ground as she hurried toward them. "Arrest this guy," she yelled, pointing at me with one long, skinny finger. "He's ruining everything." She stood there, pointing at me again and again, like I was some bad guy in a movie. Her face was all smug, her lips curled up in a little smile, like she was so proud of herself. She thought the cops were here because of her big 911 call, ready to swoop in and save the day, or at least save her precious neighborhood rules. She kept waving that finger at me, her other hand still clutching her phone, and said, "He's breaking all the rules. Look at that truck. It's on the grass. Arrest him right now." I was still leaning against my truck, just watching her. My truck was right there, parked on my front yard, its rusty blue paint looking a little dull in the sun. It wasn't hurting anything, just sitting there, quiet and still. But to Karen, it was like a giant monster stomping all over her perfect world. She kept pointing, her arm stretched out so far I thought it might fall off. "Do your job," she told the cops, her voice getting sharper. "Get him out of here." But here's where it gets juicy, really, really good. The cops didn't even glance at me. Not a peek, not a squint, nothing. Their eyes didn't move my way at all. Instead, they turned and started walking straight toward her. Yup, you heard that right, toward Karen. Their boots made a slow, steady thump-thump on the ground as they got closer to her. One of them, the taller one with a little mustache, pulled out a small notebook from his pocket. It was one of those tiny ones you see cops use in TV shows, with a black cover and a little pencil tucked into the side. He flipped it open, real calm, and looked right at her. "Karen Miller," he said, his voice deep and serious. Karen blinked. She stopped waving her arms for a second and just stared at him, her mouth opening a little like she wasn't sure what to say. "Yes, that's me," she finally answered, nodding fast. Her voice was still loud, but now it had a tiny shake in it, like she was starting to wonder what was going on. She pointed at me again, quick as a flash. "Now, about this truck," she started, ready to launch back into her big complaint. But the officer didn't let her finish. He held up one hand, like a teacher telling a kid to be quiet, and cut her off. "Ma'am," he said, slow and clear, "we're not here for the truck." His voice was firm, like there was no arguing with him. The other cop, a shorter guy with sunglasses, just stood there, arms crossed, watching her. Neither of them even looked at my truck, not once. It was like it didn't exist to them. I was over by my yard now, watching the whole thing. I'd run inside real quick after Karen started her yelling, grabbed a soda from my fridge, and come back out. The can was cold in my hand, fizzing a little when I popped it open. I took a sip, the sweet taste bubbling on my tongue, and leaned against my porch railing. From there, I had a perfect view of Karen and the cops. I didn't say anything, just watched, sipping my soda, letting it all play out. Karen's face changed fast. Like, super fast. 1 second, she was all smug and happy, thinking she'd won. The next second, she looked shocked, like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water on her head. Her little smile disappeared, and her eyes got wide. "What do you mean?" she snapped, her voice sharp again. She put her hands on her hips, leaning forward a little, like she was ready to argue. "What do you mean you're not here for the truck? I just called you. I told you about this disgrace." She waved her hand at me again, like I was some big problem she needed them to fix. The cop with the notebook didn't flinch. Not even a tiny bit. He just stood there, calm as can be, looking at her like she was a noisy kid in a library. "We've had some complaints," he said, his voice still deep and steady. He paused for a second, letting that sink in, then added, "About you." He tapped his pencil on the notebook, real slow, like he was making a point. Oh, the look on her face. It was priceless, better than any movie I'd ever seen. Her mouth dropped open, just hanging there like a fish out of water. Her eyes got even wider, and her cheeks turned pink, then red, like she was embarrassed and mad all at once. "Me," she said, her voice squeaking a little. "Complaints about me? That's ridiculous." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh, it was a nervous one, like she didn't believe what she was hearing. I took another sip of my soda, trying not to grin too big. Karen didn't know it yet, but her perfect little kingdom, the one where she bossed everyone around and made all the rules, was about to fall apart. She thought she was the queen of the neighborhood, the big shot who could call the cops whenever she wanted. But now the cops were here, and they weren't on her side. Not even close. The taller cop flipped a page in his notebook and started reading something, real quiet, like he was talking to himself. I couldn't hear what he said, but Karen did, and it made her face twist up even more. "What?" she shouted, stepping closer to him. "What are you talking about? I'm the HOA president. I don't break rules, I make them." She held up her phone, like it was proof she was right. "I just called you about this truck. That's why you're here." The shorter cop, the one with sunglasses, shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice a little softer but still firm. "We were already on our way. Got a call earlier. Not from you." He tilted his head a little, looking at her over the top of his sunglasses, and I could tell he wasn't joking. Karen froze. Like, totally froze. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her phone almost slipped out of her hand. She caught it at the last second, fumbling with it, and stared at the cops. "Earlier," she said, her voice quieter now. "What do you mean, earlier? Who called you?" She looked around, her head whipping back and forth, like she thought someone was hiding behind a bush, watching her. I stayed where I was, sipping my soda, watching it all. The can was getting warm in my hand, but I didn't care. This was too good to miss. Karen was starting to figure it out. Something was wrong, really wrong, and it wasn't about my truck. The cops weren't here because of her big 911 call. They were here for something else, something she didn't expect. The taller cop closed his notebook with a little snap and tucked it back into his pocket. "We'll get to that," he said, looking right at her. "But first, we need to talk to you, Ms. Miller." He took a step closer, and the shorter cop moved too, like they were boxing her in. Not in a mean way, just in a way that said, "You're not going anywhere." Karen's face went from red to white, like all the color drained out of it. "Talk to me," she said, her voice shaking now. "About what? I didn't do anything. I'm the one who called you. I'm the victim here." She pointed at me again, but this time her hand was trembling a little. "He's the problem. Him and that stupid truck." The cops didn't even turn their heads my way. The taller one just said, "Like I said, ma'am, this isn't about the truck." He pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket, not the notebook this time, but something else, all folded up. He unfolded it slow, letting Karen see it, and her eyes got big again. "We've got some questions," he said. "About things you've been doing around here." I couldn't see what was on the paper, but whatever it was, it made Karen take a step back. "Things I've been doing," she said, her voice all high and squeaky again. "What things? I don't know what you're talking about." She looked at me, then at the cops, then back at me, like she thought I had something to do with it. "Is this some kind of trick?" she snapped. "Did he put you up to this?" I just shrugged and took another sip of my soda. The bubbles tickled my nose, and I had to hold back a laugh. Karen was freaking out, and it was hilarious. She didn't know what was happening, but I did. Well, I knew a little bit, not everything, but enough to know she was in trouble. Big trouble. The shorter cop stepped forward now, his sunglasses glinting in the sun. "No trick, ma'am," he said. "We been getting calls. Lots of calls. Neighbors saying you been causing problems." He paused, letting that sink in, and Karen's mouth opened again, but no words came out. "We're here to check it out," he finished. Karen shook her head, fast and hard. "Problems? Me? That's crazy. I don't cause problems, I fix them. I'm the HOA president. I keep this place nice." She waved her arms around, pointing at her perfect lawn, her shiny mailbox, her neat little flower beds. "Look at my house. Look at this street. I make it better." The taller cop tilted his head a little, like he wasn't so sure about that. "We'll see," he said. "But we've got reports, lots of them. People saying you've been yelling at them, bothering them, even taking stuff that's not yours." He looked at her real steady, like he was waiting for her to say something. Karen's jaw dropped again. "Taking stuff," she said, her voice all loud and shocked. "That's a lie. Who said that? Tell me who." She spun around, looking at the houses across the street, like she thought someone was peeking out a window, laughing at her. "I don't take anything. I'm not a thief." I watched her, sipping my soda, and I could tell she was starting to panic. Her hands were shaking now, and her voice was getting higher and higher. She thought she was the big boss, the one who could call the cops on me and win. But now the cops were here, and they were looking at her, not me. Her perfect little kingdom, the one where she ruled everything, was cracking, little by little. The taller cop unfolded that paper some more and glanced at it. "We've got names," he said. "Dates, too. People saying you've been a problem for a while." He looked up at her. "We're just here to figure out what's true." Karen's eyes darted around, like she was trying to find a way out. "This is nonsense," she shouted. "I'm not the problem, he is." She pointed at me again, but the cop still didn't look my way. "He's the one breaking rules. He's the one you should be talking to." The shorter cop shook his head again. "We'll deal with that if we need to," he said. "Right now, we're talking to you." He took a step closer, and Karen took another step back, her flip-flops tripping over the edge of her lawn. I finished my soda and set the empty can on the porch railing. Karen was sweating now, her face all shiny in the sun. She didn't know it yet, but things were about to get even worse for her. The cops were here, and they weren't leaving. Her perfect little world was falling apart, and I was just standing there, watching it happen. What were those complaints? What had Karen been doing? Oh, that's coming up next, you'll love it. For now, just picture her, all confused and mad, starting to realize she wasn't in charge anymore. Stick around, because this is only the beginning. The second officer, the shorter one with the sunglasses, stepped forward. He wasn't smiling, not even a little. His face was all serious, like he had something big to say. In his hands, he held up a stack of papers. Not just one or two sheets, but a whole bunch, all clipped together with a little metal thing at the top. The papers were white, but they looked a little crumpled, like they'd been carried around for a while. He held them up high, right in front of Karen, so she couldn't miss them. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady, "we've got reports of you harassing neighbors, making fake calls to the police, and oh, this one's my favorite, stealing mail." Karen's jaw dropped. It literally fell open, hanging there like a door with a broken hinge. Her eyes got so wide they looked like they might pop out of her head. For a second, she didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at the cop and those papers, her hands frozen at her sides. Then, all of a sudden, she exploded. "That's ridiculous," she yelled, her voice so loud it made a bird fly out of a nearby tree. Ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I keep this place running. She waved her arms around, pointing at her perfect house, her neat lawn, her shiny mailbox like that proved she couldn't do anything wrong. The taller cop, the one with the mustache, just stood there, watching her. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even twitch. His arms were crossed, and he looked at her like she was a kid throwing a tantrum in the middle of class. The shorter cop flipped through the stack of papers, real slow, letting her see all the writing on them. I couldn't read the words from where I was standing, but I could tell there was a lot tiny black letters filling up page after page. Karen kept yelling, her flip-flops smacking the ground as she stomped in place. Harassing neighbors? Stealing mail? That's crazy. I don't do that. I'm the one who makes this neighborhood nice. She turned to me, her face all red and sweaty now, and pointed that skinny finger again. It's him, she shouted. He's the problem. He's the one you should be arresting. Look at that truck. It's ugly. It's on the grass. He's ruining everything. She was so mad, her voice cracked a little, like she couldn't keep up with how fast she was talking. She thought she could turn it all back on me, make the cops forget about her and focus on my rusty old truck instead. But I'd had enough. I couldn't hold it in anymore. All this time, I'd been standing there, watching her yell and scream and act like she owned the whole world. I'd been quiet, sipping my soda, letting her dig herself deeper and deeper. But now it was time. I stepped forward, off my porch and onto the grass, my sneakers squishing a little in the soft dirt. I stopped a few feet from her and looked right into her angry, confused eyes. Hey, Karen, I said, my voice calm but loud enough for everyone to hear, maybe you should have checked who I am before you called the cops. She glared at me, her eyebrows scrunching up like she didn't get it. What are you talking about? She spat, her words sharp and mean. She crossed her arms, tilting her head like she thought I was just some dumb kid making stuff up. Her face was still red, her hair all messy now from how much she'd been waving her arms around. She didn't have a clue, not yet. She thought I was just the new guy next door, some nobody with a beat-up truck who didn't know the rules. Oh, she was so wrong. I grinned. Not a little smile, but a big one, showing all my teeth. I couldn't help it, this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I'm not just your new neighbor, I said, pausing for a second to let it sink in. The cops were watching me now, and I could see a few neighbors peeking out their windows, their curtains twitching. I'm the guy the HOA hired to investigate all the complaints. And guess who's at the top of the list? Boom. There it was, the big reveal. I dropped it like a bomb, and you should have seen Karen's face. It was like someone flipped a switch. Her glare melted away, and her eyes got huge again, bigger than before. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. What? She whispered, her voice all tiny now, not loud anymore. What did you say? She took a step back, her flip-flops tripping over a little rock on her lawn, and she almost fell but caught herself at the last second. The taller cop nodded at me, real slow, like he was saying, yup, that's right. Then he turned to Karen and said, we've been watching you for weeks, Ms. Miller. This call? It's just the cherry on top. His voice was deep and calm, like he was talking about the weather, not dropping a huge surprise on her. The shorter cop held up those papers again, shaking them a little so she could hear the rustle. We've got everything here, he said. Dates, times, names. All the stuff people have been saying about you. Karen's face went white. Not pink, not red, pure white, like a piece of paper or a ghost in a spooky story. She'd been so busy trying to get me in trouble, yelling about my truck and calling the cops, that she didn't realize she was the one in the hot seat. All this time, she thought she was the big boss, the queen of the neighborhood, the one who could do whatever she wanted. But now she was standing there, surrounded by two cops, with me grinning at her and a stack of papers full of her secrets. The taller cop stepped closer to her, holding out that folded paper he'd pulled out earlier. We've got witnesses, he said. People who saw you yelling at them, banging on their doors, telling them what to do. People who said you called the police over nothing, just to scare them. He tapped the paper with his finger. And the mail thing? Yeah, we've got proof of that too. Letters missing, packages opened stuff that ended up at your house instead of where it belonged. Karen shook her head, fast and hard, like she could shake the words away. No, she shouted, her voice cracking again. No, no, no. That's not true. I didn't steal anything. I'm not a thief. She looked at me, then at the cops, then back at me, her eyes darting around like a scared animal. He's lying, she said, pointing at me again. He made this up? He's trying to trick you. I just stood there, my grin still on my face. Nope, I said, real casual. I didn't make up anything. The HOA hired me because people were tired of you. Tired of your yelling, your rules, your bossy stuff. They wanted someone to check it out, and that's me. I crossed my arms, leaning back a little, letting her squirm. I've been here a week, Karen. Just a week. And I've already heard so many stories about you way before I even parked my truck on the grass. The shorter cop nodded. He's right, he said, flipping through those papers again. We've been working with him. He's been talking to neighbors, writing stuff down, figuring out what's been going on. And you, Ms. Miller? You've been on our list for a while. He looked up at her, his sunglasses catching the sunlight. This call you made today? About the truck? It just gave us one more reason to come out here. Karen's hands flew up to her face, covering her mouth like she couldn't believe it. No, she mumbled, her voice all shaky now. No, this can't be happening. I'm the president. I'm in charge. You can't do this to me. She spun around, looking at her house, then at the street, like she thought someone would jump out and save her. But no one did. The street was quiet, too quiet, except for her voice and the little rustle of those papers. That's when I noticed the neighbors. They were watching now, not just peeking anymore. Curtains were pulled back, and faces were pressed against windows up and down the street. Old Mr. Jenkins from across the road was standing on his porch, his arms crossed, a little smile on his face. Mrs. Lopez next door had her phone out, holding it up like she was taking a video. Even the kids down the block had stopped kicking their soccer ball. They were staring, pointing, whispering to each other. The Queen was falling, and everyone wanted a front row seat. Karen saw them too, and her face went even whiter if that was possible. What are you looking at? She yelled,